Hi, welcome to my podcast, Becoming a Cut Flower Grower. I'm your host, Lydia, and I'm here to share my year of growing and selling cut flowers. I'll be giving you the lowdown on everything I'm doing and sharing all the highs and lows, the good times and the inevitable disasters, all in real time. Join me on my cut flower journey, starting right now. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the podcast for regular listeners, and hello to everybody new who's joining us for the first time. So I'm recording this today from Worcester in the Midlands. So the dog and I have come up to stay with my dad for a couple of days. And we're currently sitting in my dad's hallway trying to stay away from the windows because pretty much as soon as I got all the podcasting equipment out, a young man with a leaf blower set up right outside the building and is probably going to be leaf blowing for about the time I'm planning on doing this. So we're hiding in the hallway in the hope that you can't hear any of that. So I've got a couple of questions from my previous episode that I did on saving seeds. And one of the questions I've had from somebody is, do I need a really fancy storage box for the seeds with sort of dividers and individual color-coded categories and all that kind of thing? And my answer to that is no. Store them however you feel most comfortable, whatever works for you. If you're a super tidy, organized person and you like to have like a box file or a plastic tub with everything beautifully divided up and labeled, then you go right ahead. It's not something that I particularly do. I tend to have my seeds in a huge, like a Hessian bag that I do keep in a cool, dark place, but it's not all massively organized. And you can quite easily succumb to Instagram envy because people are posting their setups, particularly at this time of year. And some people do the most amazing organizational things with their seeds, and you can look at it and think, oh my goodness, I'm so hopeless. I'll never be any good at anything. What I would say is just because they're really good at organizing things in a really pretty way doesn't mean that they're actually going to be any good at sowing seeds. So don't give yourself a hard time. Just store them in a cool, dark place and don't worry about what it looks like. So the second question I had, which is a really good one, which is what about sowing direct? Because I was talking all about seed compost and how you can save money by making up your own. And I didn't touch on why not just put the seeds directly in the ground and then you don't even have to worry about seed compost. Well, there's a couple of different schools of thought about that. And I know lots of people who do sow directly into the ground. I'm not one of them, just because I always try and reduce the odds of things going wrong. And when I say that, it's because I've been sowing seeds for years, not in any professional capacity, just as part of my job or for my own use at home. And I prefer to start everything off in trays or cells, and then I plant them out when they're a really decent size. And it means that you can start a lot sooner because I would do it in a greenhouse. And then by the time we get to May, when all the risk of frost is pretty much gone, you've got lovely, decent sized little plants, and you know exactly what your germination rates have been, and you know how many plants you've got to go out so you can space it accordingly. The risk of just sowing direct is that anything can happen to the seeds as soon as you've gone. So in my case, my plot is in a field, and I imagine the squirrels, the pigeons, absolutely everybody just descends after I've left and has a rummage around to see what I've been up to. So I would be quite concerned about sowing direct in those circumstances unless I netted afterwards. And I just try and keep all of that to a minimum because it just takes up more of your time. So I might have a go about sowing some leftover seeds directly this year. But for anything important, I would want to start them off properly in a really controlled environment. And the other question I had is, how do seeds manage in nature if they require such careful storage over the winter in our homes? And the answer to that is, well, you don't really see flowers and plants germinating all over the place, precisely because the conditions in nature are often not ideal for the seed to be stored. So if you think about the ground where the seeds perhaps have fallen as being particularly wet, they might well rot. and you might have mice coming along, pigeons, all sorts of things might happen, which means that the seeds just don't germinate. What you do tend to see on the side of the road are plants germinating, which are really quite hardcore. So things like buddleia and other pioneer plants, excuse me, who will just germinate absolutely anywhere. But you don't tend to see roadsides or even your garden suddenly covered in a blanket of seeds that have germinated from the year before. It just doesn't happen. So that is why we tend to make such an effort to store the seed carefully, because you really don't want to risk losing it all because you've made some mistakes about where you've kept it. So that is that. All right, so in the last episode, I also talked about how to select cut flowers to grow. And I did touch on your target customer and how what you grow is linked to what your customer wants. And I really want to expand on this today because this is actually one of the most important elements of the whole cut flower growing process. If you're planning on selling your cut flowers at the end, you have got to make some decisions and do some research as early as possible. And I would start now thinking about who exactly are you going to sell to. You've got to decide who this is and plan accordingly. So you've got a few options. I'm assuming now that you're not keeping cut flowers for yourself, that you're actually planning on selling them. So you could sell them directly to a customer. And you could do this at a local market in your nearby town. You could put your flowers in buckets at your gate or at the end of your property, and people come and buy them directly. Or you could set up a subscription service whereby people pay you on a direct debit a certain amount of money either per week or per fortnight or even per month. And you then deliver a bouquet or a bucket of flowers, if that's what they want, to them. You do need to be able to arrange your flowers if you're going to be selling them at a market or to a customer. So I'm not saying you have to be florist trained or that you have to be a professional, but if you're going to sell directly to the customer, unless they just want buckets from you of random stuff, if you're going to put it together and charge retail prices, so anywhere starting from £15-20 for a bouquet, you've got to have a vague idea of how things look together and be able to do a very, very basic hand tie. You can learn how to do those on the internet. It is not rocket science, but it's also quite tricky. So you do need to practice over and over again. And you could do that yourself. You could just go to the supermarket right now, buy some bunches of flowers, go home and spend an afternoon practicing how to do a hand tie. I have struggled with that for years. So it's not that it is particularly complicated, but there is a knack to it, and florists make it look incredibly easy. But they're, of course, very skilled at what they do. So the second place you could sell would be to a florist who's got a shop on their high street. And with that, you do need to understand what their signature style is. And you'd be able to gauge this by just wandering around and going in and out of some different florists and seeing what their sort of house style is, if you like. So are they more formal, or have they got a more rustic country style? And then obviously you might decide to choose a florist who sells flowers that are going to be more like the ones that you're planning on growing. So I think I mentioned this earlier. I like having quite natural stems. I don't mind if they have a little bit of a curve or a bit of a twist to them, because I prefer that. And I'm not staking mine to get perfectly poker straight stems, because that's just not the look that really suits me and my personality. But it would be pointless, for example, for me to go into a florist that has these poker straight, very formal style of flowers and offer them a real countryside look, because odds are they're not going to be interested in that. So the other type of florist is one who really just does weddings and events. So they don't have a formal shop on the high street, but they're out and about doing special events, and that can also include birthday parties, anniversaries, any kind of celebrations that people have. So you need to find some of those and have a chat with them, and ideally meet up with them and see if they would be interested in working with you. Now, the fourth option I've got here are home florists. Now, I know we have some of these around where I am because we have a lot of big houses, big estates, wealthy clients. And these are florists who literally will do displays for people's homes. So, again, they're unlikely to have premises. You're not going to find them up and down on the high street, but they will have clients for whom they prepare installations and they'll go into the homes and they'll deliver them. And if they're doing big estates, large properties that have perhaps enormous grand hallways, then you could have a market if you're going to do flowers that are quite big or that you've got foliage. Say you've got, I don't know, hazel stems with the little catkins. You might well find a market with a home florist who wants to do a display that's, say, I don't know, 4 or 5 feet high in somebody's hallway. That could be a great market for you. So it kind of depends what you're thinking about growing and where you can see your product sitting. You do need to do some research about all of those four options and see what works best for you. So if you live in a terrace, for example, or even in a flat, you're going to find it really difficult to sell at the end of your driveway or from like a stall outside your house if everybody just walks off with the product or you don't actually have the space. And it's so important to decide on your market early because you can't afford to end up with a time sensitive product that you can't shift. So it's like deciding you want to be a sandwich maker and you go and make 200 sandwiches and then not having anybody ready to buy them. You wouldn't do that with food, so don't do it with flowers. You will find that as the season gets on and everything starts growing and the flowers start being ready, you've got to have that market ready. So that's why I'm saying start to have a think about it now. And whichever route you go down, you've got to have a level of confidence and a thickish skin to be able to do it. Now, this depends kind of on your background and what you're comfortable doing. So if you're doing, I don't know, sales and marketing already, you might find it really easy to just pick up the phone or go into certain shops with florists and say, oh, I'm going to have this later in the year. You're going to be interested. Shall I pop back later? If you're someone that finds that terrifying, you could always email them, but don't be upset if you don't get a reply because some of them just won't deal with you. And you need to be prepared to hear no, and just shrug it off and say, fine, okay, that's not the right marketplace for me. People will say no to you. They might haggle with you over the stem prices, and pricing is a whole other issue, which I will come to. I'll do that in another separate episode. Like I say, they might ignore you completely, or they might be lovely and it's the start of a fantastic working relationship, but you won't know until you get going with that. And don't be put off if it doesn't go the way you want it to go, okay? Now, having a stall at a local market, I looked into that in 2024 and I'm going to think about it for 2025. It does require commitment and it does require planning in advance because you're going to have to book a pitch and pay for it in advance. And then you have to have enough product to take it to that event. And you need to work out the numbers very carefully. So the cost of the pitch, your time, preparation time, travel time, the time that you're actually on the stall, and then the pack up time and going home, and how much profit you want to make, plus the cost of anybody else's time that you need to help you. And also a card machine, unless you do cash only. It might be something that you think, oh, maybe I'll just share someone's pitch. So perhaps you could go along to a market, see what everybody else is doing, and approach someone and say, look, can I take 20% of the floor space on your pitch and we'll share the cost of the pitch and test it out and have a go and see what the level of demand is like. I think selling at markets, well, in my head, I think it would be lovely because we have one in my local town, and I see people there shopping on Saturday morning. And I think picking up some bread and some cheeses and some meats, if that's your thing, and other treats for the weekend, I think flowers sit really nicely in that kind of shopping experience. I think I just think it's a really nice thing to do, to go shopping on a Saturday morning and shop like in the way that we used to shop before we all just automatically drove into supermarkets. Um, so again, if you're planning on selling yourself at a stall or a pitch, you do have to be able to put some flowers together nicely in a bouquet. You could just take buckets of mixed flowers, but again, if you think about it from a customer's point of view, are they going to want to walk home with just a motley crew assortment of stuff, or are they going to want to walk home with a really nice bouquet that they can just take the wrapping off when they get home, stick it in a vase, and they're all done? Or better still, give it to somebody else that they're going to go and have lunch with later. So just bear that in mind. Plus, you've got to factor in the cost of any paper or other materials that you wrap your flowers in. And also factor in as well how much else you have to be able to do. And so you've got so many stages to get through in this business, from sowing from seed or buying the plants, or however you go about it, nurturing them all summer, cutting them at the right time, conditioning them, and then getting them to market. You may find that actually selling them to consumers is just a step too far. You you you've got to be able to do so many different things, and it might just be one thing too far, and that's perfectly okay. um, so one final thing I'd like to say is not to forget that florists already have established supply chains. So they're probably already importing beautiful, perfect stems that they buy online in a really simple online process. They'll already have their suppliers sorted. They'll have accounts, login details. They can go online, place an order, knowing that everything is just going to arrive and it's going to be perfect and they can sell it. So if you're coming along and you're offering something different that potentially is going to disrupt their system, you've got to be able to offer something to them that is going to match with their style, and it's therefore going to be a product that they can sell. It's got to be highly desirable, something a little bit different, and ideally perhaps something that's high value, something that they can't get elsewhere. Now, we know that dahlias don't travel particularly well. They're so frilly and over the top and fragile. It's why you don't see dahlias in the supermarkets, but they're valuable. So if you can get dahlias to florists, I think that's a very interesting proposition, and that is what I'm hoping to do this year. So just bear that in mind, that you're going up against a very established system, and so if you want to compete with these overseas imports, and they are beautiful, you've got to match it, or ideally exceed it, and then make life as simple as possible for the florist. So you might offer to deliver for them, and just find out how they want to work with you, what's going to make the life easier for them, and try and impress them with something that they're not going to be able to get hold of easily, that's going to delight their client and reflect well on them, which makes it worth their while dealing with you. So I hope all of that is helpful. I found this part of the whole enterprise the most challenging, because my comfort zone is growing stuff, and I would much rather be out in the field doing that than actually putting myself out there and trying to sell what I've done, because it becomes a part of you. You get very emotionally involved with it. You think that what you've done is absolutely fantastic, and if people don't want it, it can be quite tough. But I would say persevere. I'll talk more in another episode about exactly how things worked out for me in 2024 when I did my trial beds, because I did end up selling some flowers, which I was beyond excited about. So it is doable. And I'm going to be going through all of this on a bigger scale this year. So I will talk you through every single thing that happens, good and bad. But start thinking, if you're planning on doing cut flowers this year, even later this year, you don't have to do it like on the 1st of March if you're not quite ready yet. If you get into dahlias, you can kick off much later in the year, but you still have to have your target market in mind, and don't put off thinking and planning about how you're going to sell your product. Okay, well, that is that for today. I hope it doesn't all sound too daunting and just too difficult. It really does boil down to your comfort level. And we're going to just smash right through those comfort zones this year together. So I hope you have a wonderful weekend. And also to everybody listening in the UK, happy Valentine's Day. All right, cheerio.